At the family barbecue, the smell of grilled ribs and corn on the cob filled the backyard. Everyone laughed and clinked glasses, but when my plate was set in front of me, my daughter-in-law leaned across the table. With a smile that felt more like a knife, she shoved it aside and said, "Don't eat. You don't pay for this food." The chatter around us faltered. I felt the sting of humiliation burn hotter than the summer sun. My fork froze in my hand as my own son shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I waited for him to speak up, to defend me, but instead he gave her a small nod, almost as if to agree. My heart sank. Tell me in the comments, if your daughter-in-law pushed your plate away at a family barbecue, would you stay quiet or speak up right there? I forced a weak smile, though inside I was trembling. Relatives glanced at each other, unsure whether to laugh or to look away. My son reached for his drink and changed the subject, leaving me exposed in silence. The sound of sizzling meat no longer felt warm and comforting. It roared in my ears like mockery. I pressed my lips together and let her enjoy her moment. Her eyes glistened with triumph, her laugh louder than anyone else's. She truly believed she had put me in my place, that I was nothing but a burden she could humiliate whenever she pleased. But I knew something she did not. Later that evening, when the bill arrived, her smile vanished. When I got home that night, the laughter from the barbecue still echoed in my ears, but it no longer sounded like joy. It was sharp and cutting, like glass under my skin. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the empty plate I had left untouched, replaying the moment she pushed it away. For everyone else, it was just an awkward comment, maybe even a joke. But for me, it was the final straw. To understand why those words cut so deep, you need to know what came before. For years, I had been the silent foundation beneath my son and his wife's life. When they bought their first house, it was my savings that covered the down payment. When they upgraded to a larger home in the suburbs, I co-signed the mortgage and paid property taxes for the first 3 years until they could catch up. Even the shiny SUV in their driveway was partly financed through my good credit. Yet, the older I got, the more invisible my efforts became. My daughter-in-law treated me like an old relic, useful only when she needed free babysitting or an extra pair of hands in the kitchen. She wore her disdain openly, turning every family gathering into a stage where she could remind me that this was her house, her rules. And my son, blinded by love or perhaps fear of confrontation, always chose her side. It was not just that night's insult. It was the years of being dismissed, of having my role reduced to nothing, even as they leaned on the very support I provided. At first, I told myself I was keeping the peace, that I would rather swallow my pride than see my son caught between us. But the more I gave, the more they took, and the less respect I received in return. I remembered the first time I noticed the shift. It was during a Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago. I had brought a homemade pie, the same recipe my husband loved, one that used to be a family tradition. My daughter-in-law took it from me with a smile that did not reach her eyes. She placed it at the far end of the table, untouched all evening. Instead, she made a show of serving her store-bought dessert, acting as though mine was an afterthought. My son ate hers and complimented it, never once mentioning the pie that sat untouched until it was finally thrown away. These small humiliations piled up like bricks. Each one added weight to the wall she was building between me and my son. But that night at the barbecue, when she pushed away my plate and told me I did not deserve to eat, the wall became a fortress, and I realized I had been trapped inside it for far too long. I looked around my modest kitchen, the one place that was truly mine. The house itself was still in my name. Years ago, after my husband passed, I decided not to sell it. My son had begged me to transfer ownership, saying it would be easier for taxes, but I never signed the papers. Something inside me had whispered not to let go completely. Now, I was grateful I had listened to that inner voice. I opened my drawer and pulled out an old folder, thick with documents. Property deeds, bank statements, credit card records, even receipts for bills I had quietly covered when their own money ran thin. As I flipped through each page, the truth settled over me like a cloak. They thought they were in control, but in reality, their lives had been stitched together with threads I had woven. Pause a second and let me know. Should a parent ever reveal all the financial strings, or is it better to wait until the right moment to strike? That question haunted me as I sat with the papers spread out before me. Part of me wanted to confront them immediately, to slam the receipts down on the table and demand recognition. But another part of me knew that real power is not in shouting. Real power is in silence, in waiting, in choosing the perfect moment when the truth will cut deepest. I thought about my daughter-in-law's smirk as she pushed away my plate. She believed she was the one holding all the cards, that she could control the narrative. But she had no idea how fragile her foundation truly was. All it would take was a single signature, a single call to the bank, and the life she flaunted would crumble beneath her. The irony was not lost on me. She accused me of being a burden, yet every luxury she enjoyed was built on my support. The vacations, the designer clothes, the constant renovations to their home, all of it had traces of my contributions. Without me, their stability would vanish overnight. I remembered one evening when I quietly paid off their overdue electric bill. They had been too embarrassed to admit they were struggling, but I noticed the notice tucked under their mail. I drove to the utility office myself and settled it, never saying a word. The next week, my daughter-in-law bragged about her budgeting skills, claiming she had managed to stretch their money better than expected. My son looked at her with admiration, completely unaware of the truth. I said nothing then. But now, I realized silence had been my mistake. The more I thought about it, the clearer my decision became. This was not about vengeance alone. It was about reclaiming dignity, about showing them that the woman they dismissed still held more power than they ever imagined. I would not scream. I would not fight. I would simply let the truth reveal itself, piece by piece, until their smiles dissolved into the same silence they once forced upon me. So, I began to plan. I organized the papers, set aside the ones that mattered most. Property deeds showing the house was still mine. Bank records tying their credit cards back to my accounts. Insurance policies that named me, not them, as the owner and beneficiary. Each document was a weapon, sharper than any insult they could throw. That night, I slept better than I had in years. For the first time, I was not the victim replaying my humiliation. I was the architect of their downfall, and the blueprint was already in my hands. The next weekend, I found myself once again in their backyard. The smell of grilled meat filled the air, and the chatter of relatives rose above the clinking of bottles and the scrape of chairs. The picnic tables were decorated with checkered cloths, plastic cups stacked neatly at one end, and bowls of chips scattered along the middle. It should have been a day of warmth and family connection, yet I felt like an outsider, sitting quietly at the edge. My daughter-in-law had always loved playing hostess. She wore a sundress that matched the bright napkins, her hair perfectly styled, her smile wide as she paraded across the yard with plates of food. Every laugh she gave carried an undertone, as if she were performing for an audience rather than simply enjoying her family. My son followed her like a shadow, carrying trays and nodding at her every word. When she called everyone to the table, I moved slowly, hoping to blend in, not to draw attention. But attention always found me. She placed a plate in front of me with exaggerated care, then paused. Her eyes gleamed, her lips curled, and with one sharp movement, she slid the plate back toward herself. "Don't eat. You don't pay for this food." The silence that followed was louder than the sizzling grill. My fork clattered softly against the table as I pulled my hands back into my lap. My face burned, not just from the sun, but from the sting of being humiliated in front of everyone. I glanced at my son. For a fleeting moment, I thought he might protest, might remind his wife of respect, might at least soften the blow. Instead, he gave a small, awkward laugh, then reached for his drink. The message was clear. He would not stand against her, not even for me. Relatives shifted in their seats. Some stared at their food, pretending not to notice. Others exchanged quick, nervous glances. No one said a word. And in that heavy silence, my daughter-in-law's smile stretched wider, confident that she had won. Inside, something in me broke, but I did not let it show. I pressed my lips together and lowered my eyes, letting her think she had silenced me. She mistook my quiet for weakness. What she did not realize was that my silence was sharper than any retort. The meal continued awkwardly. She made a show of serving others, piling extra food on my son's plate while leaving mine empty. She laughed louder than necessary at small jokes, ensuring her dominance over the table. And all the while, I sat still, my hands folded, my expression unreadable. I remembered the folder of documents tucked safely at home. I thought about the deeds, the bank records, the credit card accounts. She believed she was the queen of this family, but the throne she sat on was built on my foundation. And tonight, without lifting a finger, that foundation would crack. When the last burger was eaten and the plates began to clear, someone called for the check. My daughter-in-law stood proudly, pulling a shiny purse from under the table. "We've got this," she announced, as if generosity could erase the cruelty she had shown earlier. The waiter slid the bill toward her. She pulled out a card with a flourish, ready to display her control once again. My son watched, admiration shining in his eyes, utterly blind to the performance. But when the card touched the black leather folder, I felt a ripple move through the air. The waiter returned a moment later, polite smile faltering. "I'm sorry, ma'am. This card is declined." Her smile wavered. She forced a laugh and handed over another card, one linked to the same account. Again, the waiter returned, shaking his head gently. "Declined." End quote. Confusion spread across her face, quickly masked by irritation. She looked at my son, who fumbled for his wallet, pulling out a card of his own. "Declined." The whispers began. Relatives shifted in their seats, murmuring to one another. The air grew thick, heavier than before. My daughter-in-law's face paled, then flushed crimson. She tried one more card, her hands trembling slightly. The waiter returned with the same answer. And that was when I reached calmly into my purse. Without a word, I pulled out a simple card, one that had never once failed me. The waiter took it, ran it through, and returned with a nod. Approved. The silence that followed was no longer one of awkwardness, but of revelation. Every eye at the table turned toward me. My daughter-in-law's smile, once so triumphant, had vanished completely. She tried to speak, but no words came. Her lips parted, her eyes darted, and in that moment, all her control slipped away. She knew. She finally knew. I signed the receipt slowly, deliberately, and tucked the card back into my purse. Then I looked at her, not with anger, not with gloating, but with calm detachment. I let the weight of silence hang between us. The relatives exchanged glances again, but this time their eyes carried recognition. They saw the truth. The woman who had tried to humiliate me was the one now exposed. I rose from the table, my chair scraping softly against the patio stones. "Thank you for dinner," I said simply, my voice steady. Then I walked away, leaving behind the stunned silence, the fallen smile, and the first crack in her carefully built facade. She thought the battle had ended when she pushed away my plate. She did not realize it had only just begun. When I returned home that evening, I did not feel the sting of humiliation anymore. Instead, I felt a cold determination settle in my chest. I replayed the image of my daughter-in-law's face as the waiter announced, "Declined," again and again. That smile of hers, once so smug, had dissolved into panic. But the true satisfaction was not in that fleeting moment. It was in knowing that I still held the strings, and I could tighten them whenever I wished. I poured myself a cup of tea and spread the folder of documents across the kitchen table. The papers whispered of years of sacrifice and support, property deeds, co-signed loans, joint accounts where my name was still etched in black ink. Their entire lifestyle was tied to me in ways they barely understood. My silence had hidden the truth, but silence would now become my weapon. I thought back to the moment I had signed my husband's will. He had insisted on keeping everything under my name until I felt ready to pass it on. "Never give away what keeps you safe," he had told me, and I finally understood the wisdom in his words. By refusing to sign away ownership when my son asked, I had preserved my leverage. The first step was simple. I called the bank and froze the supplementary cards linked to my account. There was no anger in my voice, only calm precision. The representative confirmed the cancellation, unaware that with a few keystrokes I had cut off their main line of credit. Next, I contacted my lawyer, Mr. Jenkins, a man who had guided me quietly since my husband's passing. We met in his office the following day, his walls lined with books that smelled faintly of leather and dust. He listened as I explained everything, his brows lifting slightly, but his face otherwise unreadable. "You are well within your rights," he said finally. "Every property, every account, every policy is still legally yours. If they believed otherwise, it is because they never looked closely." "Oh." I nodded, my fingers brushing over the documents I had brought with me. "I do not want a fight," I said. "I want clarity. I want them to understand exactly who has been holding them up all this time." He smiled faintly. Sometimes clarity feels like a fight to those who prefer illusion. Over the next week, I followed his guidance. We transferred the SUV back under my sole name, leaving them without the car they flaunted in the neighborhood. The insurance policies were updated to reflect new beneficiaries, excluding them entirely. I even redirected the rental income from a small property I had inherited, closing off another stream they had quietly depended on. I kept my actions quiet, deliberate, and precise. There were no confrontations, no angry phone calls, no dramatic scenes. I simply removed the supports they had taken for granted. And with each step, I felt lighter, as if I were finally reclaiming the pieces of myself they had chipped away over the years. It was not long before the ripples began to show. My son called one evening, his tone casual at first. "Mom, did you happen to change something with the bank? Our card isn't working." I sipped my tea and let a beat of silence stretch before answering. "Yes, I did. I thought it was time to simplify things." There was a pause, then a nervous laugh. "Well, can you simplify it? We need the card." I could almost hear my daughter-in-law in the background, whispering sharply. My son's voice grew tighter. "We can't just cover everything on our own right now." I closed my eyes, letting the satisfaction wash over me. "Then perhaps it is time you learn how." He hung up shortly after, frustration crackling through the line. For the first time, I did not feel guilt. I felt resolve. In the days that followed, I imagined the scene inside their house, her pacing the kitchen, snapping at him for answers, him fumbling with bills and overdue notices, both of them realizing how dependent they had been. And all the while, I remained silent, a ghost pulling strings from the shadows. The relatives who had witnessed the barbecue began to talk. Whispers found their way back to me through cousins and nieces. "She paid the bill with ease," they said. They looked embarrassed. Maybe she's not as powerless as they thought. The story spread quietly, undermining the image my daughter-in-law had worked so hard to build. I did not need to defend myself. The truth was doing it for me. At night, I sat by the window with my tea, watching the streetlights flicker. I thought about the years I had endured in silence, believing peace required my submission. But peace built on humiliation is not peace at all. It is prison. And I had finally found the key. My plan was not finished. There were still more steps to take, more supports to withdraw. I was not rushing. I was savoring. Each move was measured, each decision deliberate. Revenge is sweetest when it is not shouted but whispered, when it comes not in a storm but in a slow, steady unraveling. And I knew, as I folded the last document back into its folder, that this was only the beginning. The phone call came 3 days later. My son's voice was clipped, tense. "Mom, we need to talk. Can you come over tonight?" I could hear her voice in the background, sharp and insistent. She wanted me there, but not for reconciliation. No, she wanted to corner me, to regain the control she felt slipping through her fingers. I agreed calmly, already knowing the power had shifted. Their home gleamed as always, the lawn manicured, the porch lights casting a warm glow. Yet, beneath the surface, the cracks had widened. I could sense it the moment I stepped inside. My son's smile was forced, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as she stood near the kitchen counter. "We need to know what you're doing," she said bluntly, skipping any pretense of hospitality. "The bank says the cards are canceled. The insurance policy's gone. The SUV repossessed. What game are you playing?" I set my purse on the table and sat down slowly, letting the silence stretch. "It isn't a game," I said evenly. "It is clarity. You thought you were paying for your life. You were not. I was." My son flushed. "That's not fair, Mom. We've worked hard. I opened the folder and slid a document across the table. The property deed, signed in black ink, still under my name. "Whose house is this?" I asked quietly. He glanced at it, then at me, confusion flickering in his eyes. She snatched the paper, scanned it, and her face drained of color. "This doesn't mean anything," she spat. "You promised this house was ours." I leaned forward, my voice low but steady. "I promised nothing. I let you live here, that is all." The second paper slid across, bank statements, each line a reminder of the credit cards tied to my accounts. "Who funded your vacations?" I asked. "Who covered the bills when you were behind? Who paid for the down payments, the taxes, the insurance?" Every dime you spent so freely, every card you swiped, it was my money." End quote. My son's lips parted, but no words came. His eyes darted between me and his wife, realization dawning slowly, painfully. She slammed the papers down, her voice rising. "So what? You helped us, fine, but that doesn't mean you get to humiliate us like this. We don't need you. We can stand on our own." I reached into the folder again, pulling out the car title. Her name was nowhere on it, only mine. Then why is every piece of your life still under my signature? The room fell silent. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to stop. My son sank into a chair, his hands clutching his head. She stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing without sound. I finally spoke the words I had carried since that barbecue. "You told me not to eat your food because I did not pay. From now on, do not eat mine." Her face twisted, fury and fear colliding. "You can't just cut us off. We have a family. We have children." I looked at her coldly. "Yes, you do. And perhaps it is time you learn to provide for them, without leaning on the woman you mocked." My son's voice cracked, pleading. "Mom, please, this is too much. We didn't realize." I cut him off with a raised hand. "Number, you did realize. You simply chose not to see. You chose silence when I was humiliated. You chose convenience when I covered your failures. You chose her smile over my dignity. And now you will live with those choices." The silence stretched long and heavy. Finally, she found her voice, though it was thin and shaky. "You'll regret this. People will say you abandoned your own son." I stood, gathering the papers calmly. "People already saw what you did to me. They saw the barbecue. They saw your laughter. They know who I am, and they know who you are. My regret is only that I waited this long." I turned to leave, but paused at the door. Respect is not given by blood or marriage. It is earned. And you, both of you, have spent years proving you do not deserve it. The next days unfolded exactly as I expected. Calls from my son grew more desperate, voicemails piling up on my phone. My daughter-in-law's tone shifted from outrage to begging. She promised to change, promised respect, promised apologies, whispered through clenched teeth. But words were cheap, and I had no interest in buying them anymore. The relatives who had witnessed the barbecue began to murmur louder now. Stories of the declined cards, the repossessed car, the sudden financial strain spread quickly. At Sunday dinner with my niece, I overheard a cousin remark, "She thought she was in control, but look who's really holding the strings." For the first time in years, I walked into family gatherings without dread. Their eyes no longer pitied me. They respected me. They admired the quiet power I had wielded. And I did not need to explain or justify. The truth had spoken louder than I ever could. One evening, my son appeared at my doorstep, shoulders slumped, eyes tired. He looked older, worn. "Mom, I don't know what to do," he admitted. "Everything is falling apart." I studied him for a long moment, the boy I had raised now standing broken by his own choices. "You do what every adult must do," I said softly. "You stand on your own feet, you learn to live within your means, and you never again treat someone who loves you like they are disposable." I nodded. Tears filled his eyes, but I did not waver. Compassion still lived in me, but it was not the same as forgiveness. He had stood silent when I was shamed. Now he would stand silent while I walked away. The final blow came weeks later, when the lawyer delivered updated documents to them. No more shared assets, no more hidden safety nets. Everything was secured under my name alone, with new beneficiaries written clearly in ink. The message was undeniable. They had no claim, no power, no leverage. And when they saw me again, at another family event, the fire in her eyes had dimmed. Her smile was gone, replaced by tight lips and lowered gazes. She avoided me, her once loud laughter now absent. My son hovered close to her, but even he no longer looked at me with defiance. Only shame. That was the moment I knew my revenge was complete, not because they suffered, but because I no longer did. The fallout was swift. Within days, the whispers that had begun at the barbecue grew into full-blown conversations at every family gathering. My daughter-in-law, once so eager to host with a perfect smile and loud laugh, suddenly found excuses not to invite anyone over. The neighbors noticed the SUV missing from the driveway, and when relatives asked about their summer vacation plans, she offered vague answers, her voice tight. At church one Sunday, I overheard two women discussing the incident. She tried to embarrass her mother-in-law, one said, shaking her head. But it turns out she was the one depending on her all along. The other woman tutted softly. Pride always comes before the fall. My daughter-in-law must have heard the whispers too, because she stopped making eye contact with me. Where she once flaunted her dominance, she now retreated into silence, avoiding the spotlight she had once craved. Financial trouble began to show almost immediately. Bills piled up, and without my support, they could not keep pace. The cards that had once swiped so easily were now useless plastic. I knew the car payments were overdue because I had transferred the title back into my name. I had even received a notice from the insurance company informing me that their policies had lapsed. Every string I had once pulled to hold them up had been cut, and now the weight of reality pressed down on them. My son called me often at first. His tone shifted from demanding to pleading, sometimes within the same conversation. "Mom, can you just help us this once? We're trying, but it's hard." Then, later, "Why are you doing this? We're your family." I listened, but I did not bend. I answered calmly, never raising my voice, never apologizing. "I'm doing nothing but letting you stand on your own," I said each time. "You told me I was not paying for your life. Now you can prove it." Relatives noticed the change too. At a cousin's birthday, I arrived to find my daughter-in-law already there, her smile thin, her dress less extravagant than usual. People gathered around me, asking about my health, complimenting my strength. For once, no one treated me like a burden. I could feel her watching from across the room, her eyes burning with resentment as she realized the narrative had shifted. I did not flaunt my victory. I did not brag or boast. I simply carried myself with quiet dignity, and that was enough. The contrast between her shrinking presence and my calm composure told the story without a single word spoken. My son struggled to hide the cracks. He worked longer hours, his shoulders slumping lower each time I saw him. His once proud confidence faltered, replaced by a nervous energy that betrayed the chaos at home. Still, he clung to her side, supporting her as though loyalty could patch the holes in their sinking ship. It was almost poetic, watching the very weapons they had used against me, silence, humiliation, dismissal, turned back on them without me lifting a finger. They were isolated now, not because I demanded it, but because their own actions had exposed them. Family who once believed her charming now whispered about her arrogance. Friends who admired their lifestyle now wondered how it had unraveled so quickly. One evening, I sat alone in my living room, sipping tea as the sun dipped below the horizon. For the first time in years, I felt peace. True peace. Not the fragile peace I had bought with silence, but the kind that comes from reclaiming your power. I thought back to the barbecue, the sting of her words, the laughter that followed. I remembered how small I had felt, how invisible. Now, I smiled to myself, knowing that every time she sat down at her table, every time she reached for a card that no longer worked, she would remember the night her own words came back to haunt her. The beauty of revenge is not in loud declarations or dramatic confrontations. It is in the quiet unraveling, the slow realization that the foundation you stood on was never yours. And as I folded my hands in my lap, I knew the unraveling had only just begun. It was late on a Thursday evening when the knock came at my door. I opened it to find my son and his wife standing there, their expressions etched with desperation. He looked worn, his tie loosened, his eyes bloodshot. She, once so immaculate, appeared disheveled, her hair pulled back hastily, her voice trembling. "Mom, we need to talk," my son said, his voice heavy. I stepped aside, allowing them in. They sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had once spread out the documents that secured their downfall. My daughter-in-law spoke first, her tone sharp but shaky. "We can't keep living like this. The bills, the loans, everything is falling apart. You have to help us." I stirred my tea slowly, savoring the scent before replying. "I don't have to do anything. You made it clear at that barbecue. I don't pay for your food. Now you don't eat mine." Her lips trembled, but she pressed on. "That was a joke. A stupid joke. I didn't mean it." I raised my eyes to meet hers. "You meant every word. You wanted to humiliate me, and you succeeded. Now you live with the consequences." My son leaned forward, his voice cracking. "Please, Mom. She's sorry. We're both sorry. Just, just give us another chance. I shook my head slowly. When I needed your voice, you gave me silence. When I needed respect, you gave me ridicule. Now it is your turn to sit in silence and taste ridicule. Tears welled in his eyes, but hers turned cold. Anger flickered in the depths of her expression. You're punishing us because of your pride. You're tearing this family apart. I set down my cup and folded my hands neatly. Number, I am revealing the truth. Pride is what made you mock me. Pride is what made you believe you could build a life on my back and then kick me aside. I am not tearing this family apart. I am simply stepping away, and without me, your illusion collapses. The silence that followed was suffocating. My son lowered his head, defeated, while she clenched her fists, still unwilling to accept reality. Finally, she hissed, "One day, you'll regret this. When you're alone, when no one is there for you, you'll wish you had us." I stood, my chair scraping softly against the floor. I have already been alone in a room full of family. That was the day you pushed my plate away. I will never feel that kind of loneliness again. I walked to the door and opened it, the night air cool against my skin. "You should go now." My son hesitated, his eyes pleading one last time. But when I did not move, he stood, guiding his wife toward the door. They left without another word, their footsteps echoing down the walkway. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it for a moment, my chest rising and falling. There was no joy in watching my son suffer, but there was justice. Justice for every slight, every dismissal, every moment I had been treated as less. In the weeks that followed, I saw them only at family gatherings. Their smiles were tight, their clothes simpler, their voices quieter. They no longer boasted about vacations or cars. Instead, they kept to themselves, shadows of the couple who once flaunted their supposed independence. And when our eyes met across the room, I offered nothing more than the same silence they had once given me. Inside, I felt no guilt. Revenge had not made me bitter, it had made me free. The house was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that once would have felt heavy but now wrapped around me like a soft blanket. I sat in my armchair with a cup of tea, staring at the fading light through the lace curtains. For the first time in years, I felt no knot of anxiety in my chest, no dread about the next family gathering, no worry about the next insult. Instead, I felt light, as though I had finally set down a burden I should never have carried in the first place. I thought back to that barbecue, to the sound of her voice as she pushed my plate away, to the sting of humiliation when my son stayed silent. That memory used to haunt me, replaying in my mind like a cruel refrain. Now, when I remembered it, I no longer felt pain. I felt clarity. That was the moment I realized I would no longer live in the prison of their disrespect. Over the weeks, I watched from a distance as their world shifted. The SUV was gone, replaced by an old sedan that sputtered down the road. Vacations disappeared, replaced by excuses. Their laughter at gatherings was forced, their smiles brittle. The once proud daughter-in-law, who had mocked me now, kept her eyes lowered, speaking only when necessary. My son's shoulders slumped under the weight of bills and shame. Did I feel pity? Perhaps a flicker. But pity is not the same as regret. I had no regret. For years, I had poured my love, my money, and my energy into supporting them, and all it had earned me was disdain. They had mistaken kindness for weakness, sacrifice for obligation. Now they knew the truth. What surprised me most was how others began to treat me. Relatives who once pitied me now sought me out, eager to sit beside me, to ask my advice, to include me in their conversations. Even neighbors waved more warmly, perhaps sensing the shift in the air. Respect, once denied to me in my own family, returned quietly, naturally, as if it had been waiting for me to reclaim it. One evening, my niece asked softly, "How did you do it, Auntie? How did you stay so calm when she treated you that way?" I smiled faintly. Because silence is not weakness. Sometimes silence is the sharpest blade. And I believed it. I had not screamed or shouted. I had not thrown accusations or made a scene. I had simply stepped aside and let the truth reveal itself. That was the essence of my revenge. Now, when I sit at my own table, I serve myself without hesitation. I eat in peace, no one to push my plate away, no one to question my worth. My dignity is intact, my power reclaimed. The woman who was once humiliated in front of her family is gone. In her place stands a woman reborn, steady and unyielding. If you have ever been disrespected, if you have ever felt dismissed by those you love, you know the ache I carried. Tell me in the comments, was my revenge too cruel, or was it exactly what they deserved? I will be reading your thoughts. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I whispered to myself the words that had become my mantra. Her smile vanished, but mine never left again. And with that, I leaned back in my chair, a quiet smile curving my lips, knowing that the story was no longer about humiliation or loss. It was about transformation. It was about a woman who found her strength in silence and made her silence the loudest voice of all.